I never expected that renting a house with Jesse to save money would lead to the most confusing, intense night of my life. I was already halfway asleep when I heard the door creak open, slow and hesitant, followed by the sound of bare feet crossing the wooden floor. My mind didn't register it fully, at least not until the bed dipped beside me, and I felt the weight of him sitting there, still and silent, like he was making the biggest decision of his life. Then I felt it, his hand, trembling just slightly, brushing the skin of my arm, lingering just a second too long to be innocent. We met during our last year of college, thrown together on a group project neither of us cared about. Jesse was the type of guy everyone noticed without trying. Broad shoulders, golden tan, that effortless confidence that made girls laugh too hard, and guys want to be around him. I was quieter, more reserved, the kind of guy who paid attention to people more than they realized. Something about Jesse intrigued me from the start, but I never expected anything beyond friendship, especially not this. After graduation, we both ended up stuck in that awkward in-between place where you're too broke to live alone, but too old to move back in with your parents. So when Jesse suggested we find a place together, it felt practical. Just two guys, saving money, nothing complicated. We found a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. At first, everything was easy. Split rent, shared chores, late-night pizza runs, and competitive rounds of Mario Kart. Jesse had his gym routine, I had my work-from-home job, and life fell into a rhythm that felt predictable, safe. But slowly, things started to change. I began noticing the way Jesse looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Longer, slower stares that didn't make sense. He started knocking before entering a room, even if the door was open. He stopped talking about girls, and there was a tension in the air, like something was constantly unsaid, hanging between us like thick smoke no one acknowledged. Some nights, I'd catch him watching me from the kitchen doorway, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't. Other nights, I'd hear him in his room, pacing or moving around restlessly, as if trying to work through something just out of reach. I didn't ask questions. I was too scared the answers would ruin everything. But lately, the silence between us had turned into something heavier. He barely looked at me during dinner, and when our hands brushed while passing the remote, he would jerk away like I'd burned him. Still, he never moved out, never suggested changing anything, and I never dared to ask why. That night, I'd gone to bed early. I was tired, emotionally drained from the way things had felt lately, like a constant, quiet storm neither of us talked about. I was half asleep, lying shirtless under the thin summer blanket, when I felt the shift of weight on my bed and opened my eyes to see him. Jesse was standing over me, his face unreadable, breathing uneven. He didn't say anything as he sat on the edge of the mattress, close but not touching. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might echo through the room. His hand reached out slowly, fingers brushing across my chest, stopping just over my heart. My body froze, not from fear, but from the shock of him, finally crossing that invisible line. "Jesse," I whispered, not trusting the sound of my own voice. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned down, and what he did next changed everything. His lips hovered over mine for a second that felt like eternity, and then he kissed me. Not hard, not aggressive, but gentle, like he was afraid I might pull away or disappear. His breath was warm, his hand still pressed against my chest, like he was anchoring himself to the reality of what he was doing. I didn't move, couldn't even breathe for a moment, caught between shock and something else, something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this story. If it made you feel something, smile, or even think of someone, please leave a comment. The algorithm doesn't always love our kind of stories, but you can help keep them alive. It really means a lot. When he pulled back, barely an inch, his eyes searched mine with a look I'd never seen on his face before. It wasn't lust or confidence or playfulness. It was fear. Raw, vulnerable fear, like he had just shattered the one rule he'd built his whole identity around. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "I don't know what the hell I'm doing." He moved to stand, but my hand caught his wrist before he could go. I didn't say anything, just held on, because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared admit until now. I didn't want him to leave. Not tonight, not like this. Jesse looked down at me, frozen, his jaw clenched like he was torn between running and falling apart. Then, slowly, he sat back down, closer this time. His arm brushed against mine, and I felt his skin trembling under the surface. "I've been losing my mind these last few months," he muttered, staring down at the blanket. "Every time I looked at you, it felt like something inside me was screaming, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even say it to myself." The room was so quiet. I could hear the ticking of the old wall clock in the hallway. I wanted to ask him what had changed. Why tonight? Why now? But I didn't want to scare him away, so I just pulled the blanket aside and made space beside me. He hesitated for a heartbeat and then slid in next to me, slowly, cautiously, like someone afraid of breaking the moment. Our bodies touched beneath the sheets, warm skin meeting warm skin, and I felt him exhale, shaky and full of things unsaid. His hand found my waist, fingers splaying out, holding me like he was terrified I might disappear. I turned toward him, and our foreheads pressed together, breath mingling, hearts pounding in sync. He whispered my name, soft and low, and I closed my eyes. "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way," he admitted. "Not with a guy. Not with you." I didn't ask him for definitions or promises. I didn't need labels. Not tonight. All I knew was that the distance between us, the silence that had grown like a wall for months, had cracked wide open, and through that crack, something real had finally slipped through. He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I kissed him back, our hands finding each other in the dark. His touches were slow, like he was exploring something sacred, and every time his fingertips traced my skin, it felt like a question he was too scared to say aloud. I answered with my own touch, fingers through his hair, the curve of his back, the warmth of his breath against my neck. We didn't rush. There was no need. Everything that had been building for months was unfolding with quiet intensity, moment by moment. When his hand slid beneath my shirt and rested over my chest, I felt his thumb move in slow circles over my heart, like he was grounding himself again. He whispered, "Are you sure?" I nodded, and for the first time he smiled. Not the easy, playful smile he wore around others, but something smaller, softer, more real. We kissed again. We undressed, piece by piece, with no urgency, just slow, deliberate connection. His hands on my skin, mine on his, exploring the space we'd been too scared to step into until now. That night, we didn't sleep much. We didn't talk about what this meant or what came next. We just stayed close, tangled together in the dark, our bodies saying what our mouths still didn't know how to. When the sun started to rise, he was still holding me, and for the first time in months, it felt like everything made sense. I woke to the sound of birds outside and sunlight creeping through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the room and our bodies. For a few seconds, I lay still, half wondering if it had all been some vivid dream. But then I felt him next to me, warm and solid, his arm draped over my waist, like it belonged there. Jesse was still asleep, his breathing soft, lips slightly parted. His face finally relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. My eyes traced the line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly against his forehead, and something inside me twisted, not with regret, but with the terrifying awareness that nothing would be the same. He shifted beside me, stretching slightly, and then his eyes blinked open. The moment his gaze found mine, I saw a flicker of confusion, then realization, then something I couldn't quite name. He didn't speak right away. He just stared, and I felt the weight of it pressing down between us like a loaded question. "Hey," I said softly, not sure what else to say. "Hey," he murmured back, his voice gravelly from sleep. He looked down at the space between us, then at his hand still resting on my waist, and slowly pulled it back. Damn! My heart stopped for a second, bracing for him to pull away completely to tell me it was a mistake. But instead, he sat up slowly, raking a hand through his hair, and let out a long breath. "I don't regret it," he said, not looking at me, "but I don't know what to do with it." I sat up too, pulling the blanket around my waist, unsure if I should comfort him or give him space. "You don't have to know everything right now." He looked over at me then, eyes clouded with thoughts I couldn't read. "But I feel like I should, like I owe you some kind of explanation, and I don't even have one for myself." I nodded slowly, trying to hold on to the calm in my voice. Maybe this wasn't about answers. Maybe it was just about being honest for once. He leaned back against the headboard, his bare chest rising and falling, arms crossed like he was bracing against the world. "Do you think we screwed things up?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "We broke the routine." "Yeah, but I'm not sure we broke anything that wasn't already cracking." He laughed, soft and bitter. "I've never done anything like this before. I mean, I've thought about it. I felt stuff I couldn't explain. But acting on it," he shook his head, "it's scary." I reached out and took his hand, gently unfolding his fingers from where they were clenched. I was scared too, still am. But last night, whatever it meant, it felt real. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time since he'd woken up, his fingers tightened around mine. Yeah, it did. We sat there in silence, hand in hand, until the sun rose higher and cast golden light across the room. Eventually, he stood, wrapped a blanket around his waist, and turned to me. "You hungry?" he asked, a soft smile playing at the edge of his lips. I nodded, relieved that the awkwardness hadn't swallowed us whole. Starving. Downstairs, the house felt different. Not visually, everything was exactly the same, but the air between us had shifted. He moved around the kitchen shirtless, like usual, but there was a different energy in his steps. Less pretending, more presence. We ate in silence, just the clinking of forks and the occasional glance that said more than words. But then, out of nowhere, Jesse spoke again. "What do we tell people?" The question hung in the air, thick and unavoidable. I looked up, met his gaze, and gave the only honest answer I had. "Nothing. Not yet." He nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair, eyes on me. "But eventually, I said, and deep down, I hoped that would be enough, for now. For the next few days, we acted like nothing had happened, like he hadn't crept into my room in the middle of the night and kissed me like I was the only truth he knew, like we hadn't touched each other with hands that trembled from months of tension, or slept wrapped together like we'd been doing it for years. The morning after had been quiet, cautious, but beneath every silence, every glance, was something louder than words. Fear. Not of each other, but of the world outside our front door. He didn't mention it again. Not once. He didn't touch me, didn't kiss me, didn't so much as brush against me by accident. And the longer that went on, the more I began to wonder if he regretted it, if he was trying to push it into some mental corner, file it away under mistakes, and pretend it had never surfaced at all. But the silence was starting to eat at me. We sat on the couch one night, both pretending to watch a movie we weren't paying attention to. I could feel him beside me, his knee just a few inches from mine, his hand resting too perfectly still on the cushion. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to say something, but the fear that he'd pull away stopped me. Instead, I forced a laugh at a dumb line from the movie and glanced at him. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. I said, "You okay?" He nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." But I knew that look. I'd seen it too many times in the mirror. He wasn't tired. He was scared, confused, maybe ashamed. That night, I waited for the sound of footsteps outside my door, but none came. The next morning, I found him in the garage, working out like he was punishing himself, shirtless, sweaty, arms flexing with every lift. I stood in the doorway watching him for a few seconds before he noticed me. When he did, he flinched. Subtle, but real. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Hey," he replied, dropping the weights and wiping his face with a towel. "Didn't hear you." I leaned against the door frame. "You've been in here every morning." He nodded. "Yeah, helps me think." I crossed my arms, not sure if I wanted to push this or not, but I couldn't keep pretending. Thinking about what? He hesitated, towel draped over his shoulder, his chest rising and falling faster than it should have been. About everything. "You mean what happened?" He didn't answer. I stepped closer, not enough to crowd him, but enough that he'd feel me there. "You don't have to shut me out, Jesse. I'm still me." His eyes flicked to mine, intense and searching. "But I'm not still me." That stopped me. I didn't know what to say to that, because part of me understood. He was battling something bigger than us, bigger than one night, one kiss, years of identity, of pressure, of pretending. But I didn't want to be his secret. I didn't want to be something he had to get past. Later that night, I found him sitting on the back porch with a beer in hand, staring into the darkness like it had answers he couldn't find. I sat beside him, close enough to touch, but I didn't. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight." He took a long sip, then said, "I know, but I can't go back to who I was before." I turned to face him. "Good, because neither can I." He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment I saw it. The fear, the confusion, but also the want, the need. "I missed that night," I said, not hiding the shake in my voice. "Even if you never talk about it again, I miss it." He put his beer down, turned to me, and after a long pause, he reached out and placed his hand on mine. Warm, steady, real. "I think about it every night," he whispered. "I just don't know how to stop being scared." I laced my fingers through his. "Then let's be scared together." And in the quiet of that night, under stars that didn't care who we were or what labels we wore, Jesse leaned into me, not with a kiss, but with the full weight of his body, his head against my shoulder. His fear finally exhaled into the open air. We stayed like that for a long time, and for the first time in days, I felt him again, not just near me, but with me. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just like any other, until it wasn't. We had gone out for groceries, just a simple run to the store, a list of things we barely needed, more out of routine than necessity. Jesse had been quieter than usual in the car, tapping the steering wheel absent-mindedly, his eyes glued to the road like every bump might distract him from something bigger. We walked the aisles in silence, our cart rattling under the weight of cereal, frozen pizza, and unnecessary snack food. I caught him glancing at me a few times when he thought I wasn't looking, like he was working up to something. I didn't press him. I'd learned that Jesse never moved until he was ready. When we got to the checkout line, he stood behind me, closer than usual. I could feel the heat of his chest against my back, his breath ghosting past my ear. The woman ahead of us was slow, fumbling for coins, but Jesse didn't seem bothered. Instead, his hand brushed mine again, once, then twice, then stayed there, resting on the side of my hand, like a secret he wasn't ready to say out loud. After we bagged the groceries, we stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. It was quiet in the parking lot, just a few people walking past, no one really paying attention. And that's when he did it. Without warning, without hesitation, Jesse turned to me, cupped the side of my face, and kissed me. Not the kind of kiss we'd shared in the dark, quiet safety of a bedroom, but something open, bold. His lips met mine with all the softness of before, but none of the fear. And for a few seconds, everything around us just stopped. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, like he couldn't believe he'd done it. My heart was thundering in my chest, not from panic, but from disbelief. "You just kissed me," I whispered, blinking like I was still inside a dream. "I know," he said, his voice low but steady. "I didn't plan to. I wanted to." I looked around, half expecting someone to yell or stare or say something cruel, but no one had noticed, or maybe no one cared. Either way, the world hadn't ended. He let out a nervous laugh, his hand still lingering on my cheek. Guess we're not invisible anymore. I laughed too, a sound that felt lighter than I'd expected. Guess not. Back home, we didn't talk much. There was no need. The tension that had wrapped itself around us for weeks had started to loosen, and the air between us felt different now, easier. He didn't flinch when our arms touched on the couch. He didn't avoid eye contact. And when we both reached for the same bag of chips, his hand stayed on mine just a little longer than necessary. That night, we cooked dinner together. Spaghetti, messy and under-seasoned, and ate at the counter, shoulder to shoulder. It felt like we were building something, even if we didn't know what to call it yet. Later, as we were brushing our teeth side by side, Jesse looked at me through the mirror and said, "I want to sleep in your room tonight." The words were simple, but the meaning was anything but. I met his eyes in the reflection, toothpaste foam still in my mouth, and nodded slowly. In my room, he slipped under the covers beside me without hesitation. He pressed close, wrapped an arm around my waist, and rested his forehead against the back of my neck. "I'm not ready to tell the world," he whispered, "but I'm ready to stop lying to myself." I reached for his hand under the blanket, lacing our fingers together. That's all I needed to hear. He kissed my shoulder, slow and soft, and we drifted off like that, tangled, quiet, but no longer afraid. Whatever this was between us, it was real, and neither of us wanted to run anymore. It didn't take long before the people around us began to sense that something had changed. Maybe it was the way Jesse and I sat a little too close on the couch when our friends came over, or how our jokes had softened, carrying an edge of intimacy they couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the way we looked at each other when we thought no one else was paying attention. Too long, too familiar. Whatever it was, our secret was no longer as invisible as we thought. The first to say anything was Ryan, Jesse's longtime gym buddy, who dropped by one Saturday afternoon with beer and the kind of energy that fills a room whether you want it to or not. We were all in the living room, playing a stupid racing game and trash-talking like usual, when I felt Jesse's hand casually rest against my thigh under the blanket draped over us. It was subtle, natural, but it sent my heart into overdrive. Ryan noticed. His eyes narrowed, just for a second, and then he went quiet. He didn't say anything then, but later, after Jesse had gone to the kitchen to grab snacks, Ryan leaned over and said, "You and Jess got something going on?" I froze, my hand suddenly too still on the controller. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, trying to play it off. "I don't know. You two seem closer lately." I was about to deflect, about to say something safe, something vague, but Jesse returned with a bag of chips and tossed it in my lap, settling beside me again with a smirk like he hadn't heard a thing. Ryan didn't bring it up again, but it didn't stop there. A few nights later, Marissa, my friend from work, came over to help me plan a surprise for Jesse's birthday. She and I sat at the table with papers and menus, going over dinner ideas, when Jesse walked in, wrapped his arms around my shoulders from behind, and kissed the top of my head. It was a small thing, a warm, automatic gesture, but Marissa's eyebrows shot up like they were spring-loaded. She said, her voice higher than normal. When did that start happening? I could feel Jesse freeze behind me, and for a moment I thought he'd retreat back to his old shell. But then, slowly, his arms tightened, and he stepped forward to sit beside me, his thigh pressed against mine. "It's new," he said quietly, "but it's real." Marissa blinked, then smiled in that way only she could, wide, supportive, and a little nosy. "Took you long enough." I laughed, the tension in my chest breaking like a wave. "Yeah, tell me about it." She didn't press, didn't ask for details or pry for gossip, just nodded and said, "I'm happy for you, both of you." That moment, simple as it was, meant more than I expected. It was the first time someone saw us without pretending not to. The first time we weren't just a secret, but something acknowledged, accepted. After she left, Jesse and I stood in the kitchen, both quiet, both processing. "You okay?" I asked, watching him open and close a cabinet without really looking inside. He nodded, then turned to me. "Yeah. Actually, yeah." We talked more that night than we had in weeks, about fears, labels, how neither of us knew what this would look like outside our little bubble, about family, about the friends we hadn't told, about the people we worried might not understand. "I'm not ready to tell everyone," he said, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was nervous, "but I want to stop hiding from the people who matter." That night, when he crawled into my bed again, there was something different in the way he touched me. Slower, yes, but also steadier. His hands knew where to go. His kisses had purpose. We didn't make love that night. We had already shared something deeper, but we explored each other again, bodies wrapped in soft tension and quiet gasps. His touch was gentle, reverent, like he finally allowed himself to want me without guilt. And when it was over, when we lay tangled in sheets and silence, Jesse whispered something that stopped my breath. "I'm not straight," he said into the dark. "I don't know what I am, but I know I'm yours." I turned, pressed my forehead to his, and whispered back, "That's all I need to know." It had been weeks since that quiet confession. I'm not straight, but I'm yours. And things had started to feel normal, not in the boring, predictable way, but in the kind of way that felt earned. Jesse held my hand in public now. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he kissed me in the morning before brushing his teeth. He started calling me babe in private, and once even let it slip in front of Ryan, who pretended not to hear, but definitely smirked when Jesse wasn't looking. But comfort has a strange way of making you forget how fragile progress can be. It happened on a Friday night, when a group of our old college friends decided to get together at a local bar. Jesse was nervous, but said he'd come anyway, dressed in his signature flannel and jeans, hair slightly messy the way I loved. We walked in together, close but not touching, and I could feel his shoulders tense the second we stepped into the room. Old faces, old assumptions. The night started light, beers, dumb stories, laughter that sounded just like the old days, but it didn't take long before someone brought up Jesse's ex, some girl he dated 2 years back. The jokes were harmless on the surface, but every time they mentioned her name, Jesse's smile faded just a little more. "You still crushing on blondes, Jess?" one of the guys teased, and someone else laughed too hard. Jesse forced a chuckle and took a long sip of his drink, but I could feel him pulling away, even from across the table. I tried to shift the topic, lighten the mood, but the damage was done. Later, when we got home, the silence between us was thicker than it had been in months. He dropped his keys on the counter, harder than necessary, yanked his hoodie off, and paced the kitchen like he was trying to outrun a storm in his head. "I'm not mad," I said quietly, watching from the hallway. He stopped, turned toward me, eyes already red around the edges. I don't know who I am around them anymore. I walked toward him, slowly, trying to close the distance he was putting between us. "You don't have to be who you used to be, but I don't know how to be this either," he said, voice cracking. "You're okay with who you are. You've had years to figure it out. But me, I'm just stuck." I reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "I felt like I was lying to them all night," he said, looking down, ashamed. "And when I looked at you across the table, I wanted to hold your hand so badly, but I couldn't. I just froze." I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "I get it." "No, you don't," he said, not with anger, but with pain. "You don't know what it's like to look at your friends and wonder if they'd still have your back if they knew, really knew." I looked away, heart thudding in my chest. "So, what are you saying?" He didn't answer. "Do you want to stop this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He looked up, and in that moment, I saw fear, not of me, but of himself, of what he might lose, of what he might never be ready to face. "No," he said finally, voice shaking. "I want this more than anything. but I don't know how to carry it in both hands. I stepped closer, gently this time, and placed my hands on either side of his face. Then, let me carry some of it with you. He let out a broken breath and finally leaned into me, forehead resting against mine. I don't want to mess this up, he whispered. You won't, I said, my thumb brushing his cheek. Not if we're honest, not if we stay in it together. That night, we didn't kiss for a long time. We just sat on the couch, side by side, in silence, holding hands and letting the tension slowly bleed away. And when he finally leaned into me, pressed his lips softly to mine, it felt like a promise. Not to be perfect, but to keep trying. Because love isn't loud all the time. Sometimes it's just quiet hands in the dark, holding on when everything else feels like it's slipping away. 3 months later, we hosted a small barbecue in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill, paper plates, a cooler full of drinks, and a handful of friends we trusted. The sun was low, casting a soft golden light across the fence, and laughter floated through the air like it had nowhere better to be. Jesse stood by the grill in a faded tank top, tongs in one hand, a beer in the other, looking so effortlessly himself that it made my chest ache. But what struck me most wasn't how relaxed he looked. It was how free he seemed, how unguarded, how he hadn't once looked over his shoulder before brushing his fingers against mine, or touching the small of my back while reaching past me for the ketchup. People noticed. Of course they did, but no one said anything cruel. No one gave him the look he used to fear. And that silence, that lack of judgment, spoke louder than words. Later, when the sun had set and the fire pit was glowing, we sat together on a blanket under the string lights Jesse had insisted on hanging weeks before. His thigh was pressed against mine, our hands loosely linked, and our friends were deep in conversation around us, letting us just be. I was scared this would change everything, Jesse said softly, his voice almost drowned out by the crackle of the fire. But now I'm scared of going back. You won't, I said, squeezing his hand. You don't have to. He turned to me, eyes serious but warm. I know, because this, he lifted our joined hands. This feels more like me than anything else ever did. I leaned in and kissed him. Not urgently, not to prove anything, but just because I wanted to, because I could. And when we pulled back, I heard someone whistle playfully from the other side of the fire pit. Jesse flushed, grinned, and shouted, Yeah, laugh it up. But he didn't let go of my hand. That night, after everyone left and the yard had gone quiet, we stood together in the kitchen, cleaning up the last of the mess. He placed a dirty dish in the sink, turned to me, and said, Do you ever think about how this all started? You mean the rent? I joked. He chuckled. The night I came into your room. I looked at him and smiled. I think about it all the time. He stepped closer, his hands finding my waist. I was so scared that night, that I'd ruin everything, that you'd push me away. And now? I asked, my hands sliding up to his chest. Now I wish I'd done it sooner, he said, because every version of my life that didn't have this didn't feel real. He kissed me again, slowly, like he was memorizing me, like he was anchoring himself all over again. We didn't talk about labels after that. We didn't need to. What we had was stronger than names or definitions. It was a connection built in silence, tested in fear, and shaped by every touch we were brave enough to give each other. We went to bed that night the way we always did now, wrapped in the safety of shared breath, tangled in sheets that no longer held secrets. Jesse pulled me close, his hand resting over my heart, and whispered against my neck, I love you. And just like that, everything we'd been afraid to say was finally out loud, ours, and nothing would ever be the same again.